Good Morning Liberty.
Well, hello again, Liberty lovers. Welcome to another exciting interview on Good Morning Liberty. My name is Josh Martins, and joining me once again is Abdullah Hayek. Now, Abdullah is a Middle East History and Peace Fellow at Young Voices and currently serves as an independent Middle East analyst and consultant based in the Washington, D.C. area. He previously specialized in political, economic, and military affairs of the Levant, Iraq, and Arabian Gulf regions at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. So, Abdullah, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Josh. I'm very happy to be here again.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we have a lot to talk about because there is a lot going on over in the Middle East region right now. So it's been a little bit since we talked last, a few months anyway. But why don't you just take a few minutes to kind of break down what's all happening in the Middle East? We've got some peace talks coming up. We had almost like a surprise attack between Israel on Qatar. I mean, a lot's happened, and obviously the Israel-Gaza conflict has continued. So why don't you give the listeners kind of an update? What's happening in the Middle East region right now?
Thank you, Josh. Unfortunately, in the Middle East, turmoil has become a frequent part of day-to-day life. Over the past century, there have been wars after wars, conflicts after conflicts, displacement after displacement. And if people put the puzzle together, they can come up with one obvious conclusion, is that the whole Middle East region is some way or another attached to the central issue of the region, which is the Palestine issue, the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It has been going on for almost over a century. It didn't start with 1948 when the establishment of the State of Israel. It started way before that. And today, the effects affect us worldwide. In terms of what happened with Qatar and with the peace talks between Hamas and Israel, with Trump's 20-point proposal, and of course, we have to remember what's going on in Syria right now, which never ceases to surprise. They're all attached to some way or the other to the Israeli-Palestinian issue. On September 9th, let's bring it back in terms of, biggest hits within the past month. On September 9th, Doha, the capital city of Qatar, was struck by Israeli missiles. The target was intended to be Hamas leadership. So what happened is Hamas met in Doha, Qatar, as they are based there, to discuss a proposal in a neighborhood in Doha, to discuss a proposal about hostage release, about ceasefire talks, about humanitarian aid flows, a lot of things revolving the issue in Gaza. And then the Israelis went ahead and bombed the facility in which these Hamas leadership targets were at. But it was a complete failure. They did not manage to kill a single leader within Hamas. They managed to kill 3 bodyguards, the director of Hamas's office director, and his son, and a Qatari serviceman. That obviously, with the ripple effect of such a failure, reached regionally. The entire region, both enemy and foe alike of Israel, united in anger. It even reached the White House in dismay. And it really didn't change the status on the ground in any shape or form. With that escalation, it kind of put more pedal to the metal on terms of the end game, the next day for the Gaza solution. So obviously, a little under a month after that, we had the UN General Assembly in New York. And President Trump met with regional leaders in a sideline meeting at the event. He met with the Emir of Qatar, with the President of Turkey, with the King of Jordan, with the President of Indonesia, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Arab and Muslim leaders that have weight. And they came up with the solution, that this has to be a preface to an ongoing status negotiation phase for the eventual proposal that will be displayed. And obviously, Netanyahu, shortly after the UN General Assembly, he arrives to the White House for his fourth visit to Washington since Trump's inauguration in January. 4 visits in less than a year, that's saying something. And then both of them, with their second attempt to present a deal within that year, they presented that 20-point plan for Gaza. That 20-point plan was very extensive. It was something that was much needed, but there are a bit of flaws in it, not going to lie, but nonetheless, it's a positive development. Now, obviously, it entails around the major issues of the hostage release, the ceasefire on behalf of Israel and Hamas, the urgent flow of humanitarian and medical and food aid into the Gaza Strip, which has almost 70,000 people dead since October 7th. And it also paves the way eventually for the day after in Gaza. Who is going to govern Gaza? Who is going to handle the day-to-day issues, the services, the administration? It all falls in line with an eventual end to the conflict, not just an end to this conflict. And regional leaders, those who were present in Trump's meeting at UNGA and abroad, all issued a joint statement supporting the plan. Leaders in Europe supported the plan. But the Israelis at the beginning did not support the plan. They were awaiting Hamas's response and whatnot. But Hamas responded 2 days ago in a semi-positive manner in which they stated that they will agree to the release of hostages, to the ceasefire. They did not mention any point on disarmament, but they did agree that they will hand over the governance of the Strip to an independent body of Palestinian technocrats. So all of that, it gives the impression that there are positive developments in way right now. Too many people have died. Too many people have been displaced in Gaza. It is a humanitarian catastrophe. And I think that right now, with all what we're seeing, all we can do is just hope that this follows through and just doesn't just end at where it's at.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it sounds at least like there's a positive momentum and both sides agreeing to at least part of the plan. What do you think, I guess, in your opinion, what do you think the chances are of this moving forward? Because we've seen kind of this before, and then all of a sudden it just all fell out from underneath everybody. I think it's very important that he has the regional leaders behind this as well, that it's not just the U.S. and Israel, and that he's really went to the rest of the region and got support there. How much weight is that going to carry, and how and I guess how successful do you think this plan is going to be?
Well, it's a very positive development. I think the listeners need to recognize that tomorrow is the second annual anniversary of the October 7th attacks. It hit its 2-year mark. And from that day till January 20th, 2025, the Biden administration was in the White House. Now, Anthony Blinken and many within the Biden administration engaged in shuttle diplomacy between Qatar and Israel and other regional states. But they never came up with a solution where we've seen the points so clarified, so clear in a concise way available to the public. So on that end, no, we haven't seen something like this. The Biden administration really took its time in that, and the Trump administration seems to be accelerating in that. The Trump administration right now wants to end the conflict so it can increase its feet, its momentum on the conflicts resolved, the peace deals, the ceasefires, whatever you want to call them, that it's established. And we've seen the White House advertise that at a very high level. For example, with India and Pakistan, Armenia and Azerbaijan, Cambodia and Thailand, the Iran and Israel ceasefire and whatnot. He wants to add another trophy to the cabinet. What are we going to see right now? We've seen Hamas, for the first time, respond to a proposal, to a deal with positivity. They've responded with the willingness to engage. They have mentioned that they are willing to negotiate further and clarify more points, but we haven't seen that before. So when they do that, I think that's a very positive development. What also has to happen right now, in the beginning, is that there needs to be an urgent humanitarian corridor into the Strip. that will gain much more advantage for the international community that's backing this proposal in the eyes of the people of Gaza. Because for the people of Gaza right now, they're rallying behind Hamas and the resistance aspect of life that they've carried because they have nothing else to go to. And that's in fault entirely to the Israelis' fault. Because for the Israelis, once they entered the Strip, they entered under the framework of two objectives: to eliminate Hamas and rescue the hostages. But for the average Gazan, with the devastation we've seen in the Strip, that does not reflect that. We've seen massive civilian casualties, journalists, aid workers, a total demolition of infrastructure. Day-to-day life is just shattered. So for the Gazan, which I think is the most important element of this whole proposal right now, is the average Gazan, which has suffered beyond imagination. They have to be delivered something and they have to be rewarded. So is the international community going to follow through? That is the question. What also needs to be reminded right now is that US support for Israel is shaking. We have never seen this loud voice of questioning and criticizing and attacking the whole nature of the Israel-US relationship. And this goes on both sides of the aisle. We have Republican voices such as Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie. We have Democrat voices such as Bernie Sanders and Ilhan Omar. So there's a bipartisan questioning of the nature of the Israeli-American relationship. And in my opinion, it's 90% because of Israel's behavior in Gaza. So personally, I don't think we'll ever see a pro-Israel president like Trump afterwards. I think Donald Trump was the last strongly pro-Israel Republican president, and Joe Biden was the last Democratic, strongly pro-Israel president we've seen. Because this affects polling, this affects votes, this affects the campaigning nature of any presidential candidate. So Israel needs to realize that if it does not follow through, it's going to affect it on the long run.
Yeah, I definitely see the shift on both sides of the aisle. I think it's more on the left side than it is on the right side, but you absolutely are seeing it, and have for a long time, in the libertarian, I would say, wing of the right side, as well as the libertarian, left-leaning libertarians as well. So it definitely is shakier than I've ever seen it in my lifetime. I think after this conflict comes to an end, I think that the support might come back for Israel. But at least right now, I think Trump hit the nail on the head back when he was campaigning, when he said, "You guys need to end this. You need to get it wrapped up because the whole world is turning against you." I definitely agree with you on the need for letting humanitarian aid in, because outside of Israel and the Gaza Strip, we can all argue back and forth on whose fault it is, but the person that's living there that hasn't had clean water or food or the ability to just take care of their daily needs, they don't care. They just need help, and like the politics and whose fault it is, that's beside the point to them at this point. They just need help, and the international community does need to be able to get in there, and Israel needs to allow that to happen. Now, obviously, in a war zone, that gets difficult, especially a war zone within such a small area. But regardless, the first world nations don't conduct war in a way that devastates innocent populations in the way that this has been, and that, I have said this before, like I've always been a supporter of Israel, but I don't really support how they conducted it. I believe that they needed to respond. I believe that it was absolute genocide and uncalled for what happened to them, and it didn't shock me how they responded. But to the level of where they're at now, we just can't conduct ourselves in such a manner, and they're also become victims of just modern technology. In the past, a crazy conflict like this, you could do things and no one would know about it. You can't do that anymore. It's on front page news. It's on every social media platform within minutes of it happening. Just first world countries just cannot conduct themselves like this. So absolutely 100%. Humanitarian need needs to get in there. We can argue over who's right and who's wrong later, but right now those people need help and they need to find a way to make that happen. I want to talk a little bit. So you had said before that the peace talks not only are designed to end this conflict, because we've seen these conflicts rise and fall and rise and fall and rise and fall. But you said it's the structure is to end the conflict permanently. Now that's a huge and new development. That's not something I've heard of in my lifetime, in my 45 years. How could this this peace agreement pave the way for permanent peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians in Gaza?
Well, like I said, the conflict's been going on for a century, and there have been negotiations. There have been attempts to resolve the conflict entirely, most notably since the mid-1990s up until the early 2000s during the Bill Clinton administration. But to no avail, they did not follow through. But there was a positive development with the Oslo Accords, the creation of the Palestinian Authority, governance in parts A and B in the West Bank. But that has been at a stalemate for such a long time, especially with two factors. First of all, it's the massive buildup of illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank, which have really created the nature in the West Bank to, usually it was, Palestinian cities and infrastructure that is really the bedrock of the West Bank, and it has these little dots of Israeli settlements. But if you look at it now, you have little dots of Palestinian cities that are really overlapped by Israeli settlements as the majority. They're changing the landscape on the ground, and they're making it much, much more harder to eventually solve the conflict, which should not be through any framework other than the two-state solution. No one's calling, the Palestinian Authority right now is not really calling from the river to the sea and the destruction of Israel. They've recognized Israel. They've recognized the Jewish factor of the state of Israel. They've negotiated with Israel. So that is the partner for peace in any solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, there's more than that to the picture. First of all, the Palestinian Authority, due to its inability to progress and develop into the body it was designed to be at Oslo in 1993, it faltered. It fell through. It eroded. Corruption ate it. Inefficiency ate it. The Palestinian Authority was hijacked by the failure to do a change. And besides corruption, we've seen these elements that really hit the headlines, but they're not as big as they seem, like the pay for slay and the rewarding of Palestinian martyrs against Israeli targets. These are such minor issues, but really aren't the defining factor of the Palestinian Authority, because the Palestinian Authority remains committed to resolving the conflict with the Israelis. They remain open for the negotiations. Now, the Donald Trump administration, in its first term, brought out a plan in 2020 called the Roadmap to Peace and Prosperity, or the Trump Peace Plan, or the Deal of the Century, as it was called in the Middle East. Now, that really brought about a factual two-state solution. However, if we go through the map is really scattered for a Palestinian state. No nation or people or government would ever accept such a proposal. And it was done so for one obvious reason, is that it did not consult with the Palestinian Authority or did not include them in the negotiations. Now, that doesn't happen. When you're negotiating for a peaceful solution to a conflict, you usually have that side present to get them their input, their feedback to end the conflict. That resulted in the image of that 2020 peace plan as an imposition, as forcing them to accept it as an ultimatum. And obviously the Palestinians refused for obvious reasons. No state can survive such a geography, such a structure of a state. Now, with that falling through, the Trump administration has experience with dealing with that. I wouldn't say that they have the best people on the team to deal with that experience, but nonetheless, they're engaged in it. They're committed to it in some way or the other. Netanyahu, in his speech this September at the UN General Assembly, he stated very explicitly, as he has stated before, that he does not want any Palestinian state whatsoever on the west side of the Jordan. Now, when he says the west side of the Jordan, it kind of brings back the average person in the region through a stroll through memory lane, because Netanyahu, before his premiership, before his rise to power, in his day-to-day conversations and his media appearances, he stated, when he was a very young man, he stated that there already is a Palestinian state, which is Jordan. So when he says there is no Palestinian state west of the Jordan, it gives us the conclusion that he believes that there is already a state of Palestine in Jordan, because Jordan is predominantly Palestinian in terms of demographics. But that doesn't really end the conflict, because the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza remain there. They have lives there. They didn't just sprout from the ground. They have a right to determine their future, as should be the case for anyone. Now, with this 20-point proposal rolled out 2 weeks ago, it wasn't really explicitly clear on the dynamics of which the administration would go through in terms of dealing with what is the eventual solution to the whole conflict, as you just mentioned. But it does set the indication that they are willing to explore it, to enter negotiations to fully end it. Now, Donald Trump, in his first term, back in 2017, when he first assumed office, said he's going to deal with the conflict and end the conflict. But he didn't roll out his peace plan up until January 2020. That took 3 years to give us the solution, to give us the map, to give us the agenda, the points on what the conflict solution would be. So is it going to be the case right now? I think so, because this is something that is so intricate and so delicate in nature that besides taking just 3 years, I hope that the Trump administration have learned the lesson that you have to include the Palestinians in American eyes, the good Palestinians who you've helped negotiate into their creation, the Palestinian Authority, in the process. I do have one criticism of the 20-point plan that Trump rolled out in September, is that it fell in line with Netanyahu's agenda that the Gaza Strip would not be given to the Palestinian Authority. And in Hamas's response to that 20-point plan just 3 days ago, it also fell in line with that because it wanted that to happen. So when Trump and Netanyahu proposed that the Gaza Strip will not be handed over to the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas immediately directly accepts that, it's not a good positive indication. Hamas wants the Gaza Strip to be handed over to a body of independent Palestinian technocrats. What a vague term, okay? This does not work in the Middle East, okay? A body of independent technocrats is like saying you want God to inherit the earth right now. It is such a vague term. We already see that there are numerous reports and descriptions of the Palestinian Authority being corrupt, and it needs to be revitalized, brought back to life. Why doesn't the international community focus on that as well? Why isn't the international community not pressuring the Palestinian Authority to hold elections? Oh, but because Hamas won the elections last time in 2006. That mentality doesn't work. 2006 was 2 decades ago. Literally. We need to have a diligent process to revitalize the body that represents the Palestinian Authority right now, the Palestinians internationally, to come in and take over the Strip, because a body of Palestinian technocrats is going to collapse. Nobody obviously wants Hamas to be in power. So you already have a body that has engaged with the West, with the international community extensively on governance, and in terms of their model in the West Bank, without those minor infractions of what I mentioned, like the pay for slay and whatever that get way more attention than they deserve, they have had a successful model. Palestinians were able to have services provided. They were having schools going through, universities, hospitals. They had passports they can travel to. They were paying taxes, and they had a good system of infrastructure, roads, lighting, electricity, water. That governance model in the Palestinian realm is not matched, and it can't be matched right now because so much has been invested in the Palestinian Authority, in which people have relied on it, that it would be very unwise to go back on that and recreate it from scratch. We're going back into square one. That doesn't work. The Gaza Strip right now, unfortunately, presents an advantage for that in terms of it is completely demolished. The Gaza Strip right now, 97% of it is just pure rubble. The reader and the listener to this podcast needs to understand that the Gaza Strip right now is demolished. It's a demolition site. Obviously, it's a much easier task for anyone to rebuild it because you can rebuild it any way you want. The Palestinian Authority didn't just pop up yesterday. They've been engaging and they've been functioning since 1993. That's 33 years as a body of governance. So when they have the Gaza Strip, in which the people have suffered and are waiting for salvation and in terms of a new government to help them rescue them, I'm pretty sure that the Palestinian Authority from within would find the motivation, would find the willingness to try and root out the corruption and inefficiency that have really just drove us crazy in terms of the headlines. So I believe I might be coming out as an advertisement for the Palestinian Authority. I'm really not. I have much too points to criticize the Palestinian Authority. I'm no fan of them and their current structure. But in terms of their vital role in solving the conflict, there's really no other solution. Because it's going to create another cycle of violence. It's going to create and pave the way for another group to take advantage of extremism and taking alliances with foreign powers. And it's going to take us back in square one, and we're just going to go through that cycle all over again. So I think right now that the major point that the Trump administration and the international community needs to do is focus on revitalizing that recognized Palestinian body called the Palestinian Authority, help them go into Gaza after we've secured a ceasefire, a hostage release, and a flow of humanitarian aid, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I think you're right in that they are established. There's so many flaws, and I definitely agree with what you said, where they haven't had elections in, what'd you say, 2 decades. So you can't, I mean, many of the people that they're governing never had a chance to pick their government at all. You know, if it's 20 years since an election, you're asking people to live. I mean, in America, we could barely make it through 4 years before half of the population is just up in arms, you know, with whatever administration's doing. So asking somebody to live under the rule of an organization that is not giving them a chance to have a voice in it. But again, that comes from the trusting the Palestinians to vote their best interests, which, you know, yes, they voted in Hamas, but that's 20 years ago. You have to trust sooner or later, and that then gives them, again, like you had said before, somebody to root for, because you don't want them rooting for Hamas, and that's the only body they have to root for right now. Give them somebody to root for who wants to actually negotiate, who wants to actually find a solution, and then give them the power to remove the people if they get corrupt. It doesn't seem that difficult, but again, I haven't lived in a war zone most of my life, so it seems a lot simpler to me than because I've not had that kind of stress and those kind of problems. I want to pivot back to this attack on Qatar because that surprised me, and it really adds a dynamic into the American problem and where you said like America's support for Israel is getting shaky. Well, Israel attacked one of America's closest allies in that region. It really put the Trump administration and America kind of in a really delicate spot. What was Qatar's response to that? Exactly what did they do in response? Because they were on pretty peaceful terms with Israel before that attack. What was their response to this surprise attack into their territory?
Well, Qatar played the diplomatic model and successfully bore fruit with it. Qatar decided not to escalate. Now, Qatar is no match to Israel militarily, but it still has military capabilities that could make some damage. We have to go back and explore the nature of the Qatari-American relationship. Now, Qatar is no ordinary U.S. ally. First of all, it's a major non-NATO ally. It hosts Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which is home to CENTCOM's regional headquarters. There are 11,000 American military personnel at that base. It has been vital in every U.S. military operation since the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, till the war on terror, till the Operation Inherent Resolve to remove ISIS. It has been pivotal. There are numerous American military aircraft and equipment stationed there that, if our listeners are in the military, they will recognize that by themselves. Also, we also have to remember one thing. In May this year, Trump, in his first international visit, went to the Arabian Gulf region. He went to Saudi Arabia, he went to Qatar, and he went to the UAE. He secured almost $5 trillion collectively, altogether, in every format and option of the deal with those three countries. But in Qatar itself, he guaranteed total $1.2 trillion worth of deals to be invested in America, that will bring back jobs, that will help the American economy re-nourish itself. That 1 trillion is no small number. We hear billions all the time and multi-millions, but $1 trillion deal, $1.2 trillion deal, that's a lot of money. So obviously the Qatari response was that they have to engage diplomatically to avert that and to preserve their status and to help the international community recognize their position in all of it. So obviously the first step was that, in anger and enragement, it rallied the whole region around it. Not just American allies in the Arab world went behind Qatar, but Iran went behind Qatar. Turkey went behind Qatar. So when you have the same position in Tehran and Riyadh and Abu Dhabi and Ankara and Amman, all together with the same outrage, that's saying something. So obviously there was a massive enragement on behalf of the Arab world and the broader Middle East. The Qatari prime minister and also foreign minister was dispatched to Washington. There were negotiations on that end. They went through for about 2 weeks, where we've seen that there was contact, phone calls between the Qatari leadership and the White House. And obviously it went through when Emir Tamim, the head of state of Qatar, participated in the meeting in the UN General Assembly with Trump. And then afterwards, about a week and a half later, we see that the White House signs an executive order that the US assures the safety and security of Qatar, bringing it up to near NATO status, in which an attack on Qatar is an attack on the United States and vice versa. So this comes in light of not just the Israeli attack in September, but also the attack on Al Udeid base by the Iranians in June. Because after the US participated to aid the Israelis in its war against Iran, the US went ahead and scrambled B-2 bombers and bombed Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan nuclear sites. As a result of that, the Iranians launched 14 ballistic missiles into Al Udeid. Now, thankfully, they were all intercepted, but they could have gone much worse. If it was launched at the same trajectory that it was launched at Israel, in which over 35 people died over a span of 12 days, we would have seen numerous American casualties at Al Udeid, especially that the missile systems that were used to intercept those ballistic missiles from Iran, the THAAD and the Patriot. The THAAD is pretty impressive, but I think it's important to know that 75% of the entire missile supply of THAAD for the entire US armed forces was exhausted in just 12 days. That's a very important thing to remember, because Iran launches $40,000, $50,000 missiles only to be intercepted by $3 and $4 million THAAD and Patriot batteries. So in terms of the cost ratio, Iran is winning by a milestone. So Qatar won. And that end, it won. And it's important to remember, I almost forgot to mention this, and I don't know why. Netanyahu, in a three-party call with Trump present and Netanyahu present at the White House, calling the Qatari prime minister, Netanyahu apologized. Netanyahu managed to state that he regrets attacking Qatar, he regrets that the strike took place, and that it will never happen again, in an apparent apology. So I think the Qatari example in this end was a prime example that diplomacy wins. Escalation does not bring any advancement to your interests as a nation. We hope that the Israelis follow through with that, and the Iranians as well. Because in terms of the two actors in the region right now, who are always tied to the conflict and military actions, we always see that it's Iran and Israel. So I think right now that the Israelis, since they have ahead of them a positive example of de-escalating and preventing yet another war that could have brought them in and their servicemen in, like what could have happened with Qatar, because Qatar was attacked. It was a state of war. That was a declaration of war upon Qatar. The Qatar is not going to care whether you're going to attack Hamas targets or not. It cares that the missiles fell on its territory in a civilian neighborhood in its capital city. It chose not to go to war. So for the Israelis right now, I think what they have to do is to avert any possible re-escalation on the Gaza front and prevent itself from being entangled in another year or two in the Gaza war, and just have it ended with. Because quite frankly, I think everyone's really tired of this. I mean, never in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict has a war taken over a month or two. We have the 6-day war of 1967. We have the 20-day war of 1973. The Lebanon war was obviously an exception, but the wars traditionally for Israel don't take longer than a month or two. Israel's been there for 2 years, and it hasn't reached any of the objectives. It hasn't saved all the hostages, and it hasn't eliminated Hamas. So I think diplomacy, if given a chance, might prove to be successful. So I think that's what one should learn from the Qatari example in reclaiming its right as a state on the international community when attacked.
Definitely. Let's hope that that model is followed more often than it hasn't been in recent memory. I have one last question for you. Now, this is something that I ask everybody. So if you had the power to make a change for liberty, whether it brings us closer to liberty or it opens people's eyes to liberty, what is something that you would do?
Liberty is the essence of life. You know, the God-given right for every human being. Every human being deserves liberty. They deserve the right to happiness, to the pursuit of life, to the preservation of life. I think that the most important thing here is that for the big players on the stage, the world leaders, the global powers, topped by the United States, need to ensure that they strive their utmost best around the world to deliver that notion. And if they can't deliver that notion of liberty, they have to create the chances, the environment, the opportunities that will let that flourish by itself. That is what liberty is all about, because liberty is self-pursued. It is not a granted right. It's not a granted privilege. It is something that is sought for. It is something that is brought between the people deciding it for themselves. So the least that the world can do, especially the United States, is that it should help create the environment in which something like that should flourish. And I wish liberty to everyone.
Absolutely. I've often said, as a libertarian, I'm not a libertarian who says there can be no governments at all. I've read the work. I understand that there's an argument for it, but I just don't see realistically how that works. So I'm one of those libertarians that says the government should be as small as humanly possible. But their core job, the only thing that the government should be there to do is to protect the liberty of the individual. That's it. It's to negotiate between two different individuals to make sure that one isn't trampling the rights on the other. It's to protect the liberties of the individual. That's how you create liberty around the world. And I definitely agree with you that the top players and all the governments around the world, we have to get to a point someday where that is their core mission. That is the only thing they're trying to do. They're not trying to, provide whatever to whoever. They're just trying to actually protect the individual liberties of every individual in their territory, and then let those individuals thrive in their own liberty. I definitely agree with you. All right. Well, Abdullah, thank you for joining me today and just walking us through all of the different aspects of what's going on over there. I'm leaving this talk with you hopeful that there can be a change over there. And that's saying something, because I haven't had a lot of hope in the Middle East for a few years now. So I'm hopeful that this can be the beginning of a peaceful change and a transition, especially for the Palestinian people. I hope that and I'm not talking about Hamas or anything like that. Please don't send the hate mail. I'm talking about the everyday innocent Palestinian person who's just been caught in this terrible hell of a crossfire that needs the help and needs the humanitarian aid. I really truly hope that this is the beginning of the end of that nightmare for them, and they can get their lives back very, very soon. So Abdullah, thank you so much for joining us and really just walking us through all the stuff that's going over there. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Josh. It was great talking to you again, and amen to everything you just said. And I really look forward to our next discussion. Hopefully, our next discussion would come in light of circumstances that reflect that positivity and optimism.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, Liberty lovers, go online and check out more of Abdullah. Oh, I never gave you a chance to plug your work. Where can the listeners find more of your work, Abdullah?
No worries. I can be followed on X at Hayek99.
All right. I will definitely have that in the show notes, Liberty lovers. So definitely jump online and check out more of Abdullah's work. It's really good. He's very thorough on the Middle East area, and it really can be a good guide for you. So while you're online, jump on over to goodmorningliberty.us and become a member of the Fed Haters Club. Leave us a rating review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify so that these messages get out to all the people they need to hear them. And you know what? Be good to the sponsors that support this show. They make it possible for us to bring on these great guests. So please be good to them. So if you do all that, I promise I'm going to be back next time with another exciting person that you all need to know. Until then, remember, you own your choices, each and every one. So make some good ones. I hope you all have a good night, a good day, and a good morning, Liberty.